Tensions between China and Japan have escalated sharply, as if a storm is rapidly gathering over East Asia. At the center of this storm, Japan has been pushed to the forefront, like a carefully placed chess piece waiting for the fateful move. Yet what is intriguing is that the United States, as Japan's backer, has acted unusually cautiously. Even timidly, one might say. This abnormal attitude not only raises doubts, but also deserves in-depth analysis. Initially, facing widespread inquiries from the outside world, Trump actually chose to stay out of it, as if the dispute had nothing to do with him. His famous remark, "China is not an ally but a friend. Many countries are allies but not friends," was like a bucket of cold water, drenching the Japanese who had eagerly anticipated U.S. statements of support to the core. Across Japan's political arena, there had originally been hopes that the United States would step forward to stand by Japan. Even verbal support alone would suffice to give Japan more confidence in its confrontation with China. However, Trump's indifferent response was like a loud slap in the face, awakening those Japanese politicians still immersed in the fantasy of the U.S. minus Japan alliance. As time passed, China's pressure intensified further, from diplomacy to the economy, from military affairs to public opinion, advancing on multiple fronts and escalating layer by layer. Finally, the U.S. ambassador to Japan posted on social media a seemingly firm message. "I want to express on behalf of the President of the United States, myself, and the embassy, to the Prime Minister of Japan that we all fully support him." Yet, this short sentence is filled with intriguing details. First, it was only an ambassador who made the statement, not the President himself, let alone senior officials like the Secretary of State or Defense Secretary. Second, before mentioning on behalf of the President of the United States, he deliberately added the qualifying phrase "I want to," as if leaving himself an escape route, afraid of being held accountable later. This cautious, hesitant attitude hardly resembles a superpower's commitment to its ally. Instead, it is more like a perfunctory consolation, even tinged with a hint of reluctance. This raises a crucial question: has pushing Japan to the forefront as cannon fodder to exhaust China always been the United States' strategic plan? Was Sanae Kakai widely regarded by the outside world as a die-minus-hard pro-minus-US vanguard in Japan's prime minister, precisely the key figure handpicked and promoted by the United States to implement this plan? Today, the plan seems to be progressing as scheduled. Frictions between China and Japan continue to escalate, and there are even signs of evolving into armed conflict. Yet, why has the United States backed down at this critical juncture, being so stingy even with moral support? How can this make Japan feel confident enough to bet its entire national fortune on confronting China? In fact, the answer is not complicated. The United States' caution stems not from moral or emotional considerations, but from cold, reality-based strategic calculations. Simply put, the balance of power has shifted. Once upon a time, while China's rise was already evident, in the eyes of the United States and the West, China's strength, especially its military strength, was still insufficient to pose an overwhelming threat. Back then, while China already had a large economic scale and a complete industrial system, it still lagged significantly behind the United States in areas such as high-and military technology, blue-water combat capabilities, and strategic projection capacity. Thus, on the chessboard of U.S. strategists, Japan was an extremely valuable strategic piece. As the world's third-largest industrial power, Japan not only boasts a solid manufacturing foundation, but also faces China across the sea, endowing it with inherent geographical advantages. If Japan could be transformed into Ukraine in East Asia, dragging China into a quagmire through a prolonged war, it would not only effectively exhaust China's national strength, but also buy time for the United States and the West to restructure their strategies, impose a comprehensive blockade. Hence, we have witnessed that over the past few years, the United States has continuously pressured, coerced, and lured Japan into manning it, increase military spending, relax restrictions on arms exports, strengthen military deployments on the Nansei Islands, and even attempt to push Japan to revise its peace constitution to completely lift military constraints. From Shinzo Abe to Fumio Kishida, successive Japanese prime ministers appeared to cooperate on the surface. But in reality, they openly obeyed while secretly defying, never willing to fully tie themselves to the U.S. war chariot. They were well aware that once becoming the front line of Sino-US confrontation, Japan would face catastrophic consequences. This strategic procrastination once frustrated the United States greatly, yet left it helpless. It was not until Sanae Kakai took office that the United States seemingly found its ideal candidate at last. This female politician, renowned for her tough stance toward China, not only publicly declared that Japan should acquire the capability to strike enemy bases, but also actively promoted U.S. minus Japan military integration, and even claimed that what happens to Taiwan is what happens to Japan. Her ascent to power was regarded as a major breakthrough in the U.S. strategy of exhausting China through Japan. China also responded swiftly from diplomatic protests to economic countermeasures, from military exercises to public opinion pressure, advancing step by step and showing an unprecedented tough stance. For a time, tensions in East Asia became extremely strained, as if a full-scale war was imminent. Yet, at the critical moment when China and Japan were on the verge of a confrontation, the United States unexpectedly hit the brakes. Trump's silence, the ambassador's caution, and China's restraint from military action all revealed a clear signal. The United States does not want China and Japan to actually fight, at least not now. Why? Because China has grown so powerful that Japan no longer even qualifies as cannon fodder. In recent years, China's military strength has achieved a leapfrog development. From hypersonic missiles to stealth fighter jets, from aircraft carrier battle groups to the BEI-2 navigation satellite system, from quantum communication to the military application of artificial intelligence, China has achieved technological parity with the United States in many key fields, and even surpassed it in some areas. What has shocked the United States and the West even more is that China boasts the world's most complete and powerful industrial system. Known as the World Factory, China's military-industrial capacity is far beyond that of the United States, which has long been deindustrialized. Once entering a wartime state, China can quickly convert its civilian production capacity into military production. Its war potential is unfathomable. In contrast, although the United States remains the world's top military power, its military-industrial system is already riddled with holes. Aircraft carriers are quayed for maintenance, F-35 fighter jets suffer frequent malfunctions, and critical resources such as rare earths are heavily dependent on imports from China. The Russia-Ukraine war has lasted nearly 3 years, and the arms depots of the United States and the West are nearly depleted. They're already struggling to assist Ukraine. How can they support a full-scale war with China? Multiple war games conducted within the U.S. military have shown that once a war breaks out with China in the Western Pacific, the U.S. military will inevitably suffer defeat. Against this backdrop, letting Japan confront China alone is no different from letting a sheep challenge a lion. Not to mention a prolonged war, it is feared that within a few months, Japan will collapse under China's overwhelming offensive. And once Japan is defeated quickly, China's influence in East Asia will surge like a breached dam, irresistible. At that time, not only will the U.S. alliance system in the Asia-Pacific collapse in an instant, but its global hegemony will also crumble along with it. This outcome is absolutely unacceptable to the United States. Thus, the United States' current strategy is not to exhaust China through Japan, but to suck Japan dry. Since Japan no longer has the strategic value to exhaust China, it might as well squeeze every last drop of value from it. Hence, we witnessed the absurd scene of Trump publicly demanding that Japan pay $550 billion in protection fees. This figure is almost equivalent to Japan's annual military budget. The United States' logic is, since you cannot defeat China, stop wasting resources, hand over the money, relocate your industrial system back to the United States, and let your technical talents work for us, exactly filling the gap of U.S. industrial hollowing minus out. At the same time, it continues to promote verbal confrontations between China and Japan, economic decoupling, public opinion confrontation, military deterrence, creating an atmosphere of tension to force Japanese capital and industries to accelerate their flow to the United States. This achieves reaping gains before the war breaks out. This is the current Three Kingdoms drama unfolding in East Asia among China, the United States, and Japan. China seeks to break the deadlock. The United States seizes the opportunity to reap gains, and Japan is placed on the altar. Therefore, I believe it is time for China to launch the process of breaking the deadlock. Although continuing to cooperate with the U.S., led global order still yields short-term dividends. In the long run, the U.S. led order is accelerating its collapse. The United States is also desperately decoupling from China. Rather than waiting to be kicked out, it is better to take the initiative to establish its own sphere of influence in East Asia. Japan is precisely the key piece in this chess game. Subduing Japan will not only break the U.S. island chain blockade, but also lay the foundation for building China's version of globalization. Thus, China's pressure on Japan, in my view, is not an impulsive act, but a well-thought-out strategic move. For the United States, since it cannot exhaust China through Japan, it has settled for the next best thing first sucking chip and try to replenish its own strength. By creating more panic, it forces Japan to hand over its wealth, industries, and talents, gaining time for U.S. reindustrialization. At the same time, it strictly controls the situation to avoid an actual war breaking out and prevent an early showdown with China. This strategy of stoking tensions but not igniting them may seem contradictory, but it is actually sophisticated. It reaps gains from allies, contains rivals, and preserves itself. Hence, the bizarre scene we witness is China is aggressive, pursuing Japan relentlessly. Senator Kakai, whom the United States personally helped take office, is outwardly tough but inwardly weak, able only to muddle through. Yet Trump, once an arrogant hegemon, hides behind the scenes, daring not to make even a clear commitment. This is not because the United States has backed down, it is because it truly cannot afford to lose. In the future, the situation in East Asia will most likely continue to operate on the track of verbal confrontations for a period of time. China will maintain sustained pressure, but will not lightly provoke a war. The United States will continue to stoke tensions, but will not enter the fray personally. As for Japan, after being squeezed dry of its last drop of value, it will be ruthlessly abandoned. It is not until the day when China and the United States deem the time ripe that they will truly decide the fate of East Asia and even the world. By then, Japan, once an economic giant and a military dark horse, will presumably have long since been reduced to a victim of great power games, completely losing the chance to turn the tide. This is the cruel logic of great power politics. A chess piece is always just a chess piece. Once it loses its value, it does not even qualify for mercy.